These little things, mobile telephones, have changed our lives forever. Depending on your age, you may remember life before the mobile telephone. You may remember having to ask to use your friend's home phone to call your parents to let them know that you were going to be late. Or perhaps you carried a few coins in a secret pocket somewhere on your person to use that yellow or red call box in an emergency. Being a late Gen Xer, I'm 44 this year, I remember the transition from payphones to cell phones. I remember my first mobile phone and its 49 pence per minute fee. Ouch. I remember the advent of the smartphone, and I remember how much phones like the iPhone changed the world. And while we can wax lyrical about how life was easier without smartphones and when we had real conversations around the dinner table, we didn't. We might like to think we did, but we didn't. There are a lot of things that smartphones bring to the mix that have helped us live more productive lives. In the automotive world, there's no better example than being able to connect your smartphone to your car's infotainment system using Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. The two technologies, now pretty standardized across most vehicles, allow you to use your favorite mapping app inside your car instead of a usually inferior in-car mapping solution. They allow you to place calls hands-free to your contacts and listen to your favourite music or audiobooks without having to shuffle CDs or cassette tapes. Remember those? I miss them, but not most of the time. These days, both technologies are pretty much expected features in most modern cars. And I say most because neither Tesla nor Rivian offer either technology in their vehicles. Lucid only just recently introduced them in its vehicles via an over-the-air software update, and Polestar, whose infotainment system was based on Android at launch, has only just added CarPlay functionality to its cars last summer. And last week, General Motors confirmed that its next generation of electric vehicles will not come with either Android Auto or Apple CarPlay from the factory, deciding instead that it would go it alone with its new Ultifi in-car operating system. And from first glance, we think it's the worst decision GM has made, aside from crushing the EV1, that is. Let's talk about that. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto have existed in the automotive industry now for the better part of a decade. CarPlay was first revealed back in 2013 at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference and began appearing in cars in 2014. Meanwhile, Android Auto was introduced in 2014 at Google I/O and was released to the public in March of 2015. And in the time since, both have become must-haves for anyone lucky enough to own a new-ish car. Their respective screens are instantly recognisable to anyone who's used either system for any length of time, and the most recent iterations of both will allow you to interact with that screen using mainly voice commands, allowing you to keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road. GM's decision to dump Android Auto and Apple CarPlay goes against the very thing that GM has promoted it wants to do, make electric vehicles mainstream. And so today, I'm going to explain why I think that by giving you some analogies, explain why I think it will lead to more driver frustration and could ultimately lead to an increase in distracted driving. The first thing I want to focus in on here is standardization. CarPlay and Android Auto have become the de facto standard for connecting your car to your phone. And if there's one thing the auto industry needs, it's better standardization. To explain better though, let's go back in history. While it is generally accepted that Henry Ford, for all of the bad things that he espoused during his lifetime, was the driving force behind standardizing and automating the vehicle production line, the cars that rolled off that line were anything but standardized when it came to their controls, at least from a modern perspective. That's because back in those early days of the 20th century, cars were new and the industry hadn't really decided exactly how one should drive them. By the time the Model T had entered into production, the industry was pretty au fait with the idea of using a steering wheel rather than a steering tiller. They were okay with the idea of using pedals to control some function or other of the car and levers to control others. But that's pretty much where things stopped. And if you've ever had the chance to drive or ride in a Model T Ford, I happen to have a friend who has one, you'll quickly notice that the controls you use to drive them are very different to those found in modern vehicles. The accelerator control is on the steering wheel, so is the ignition timing. The 3 pedals, instead of the left clutch, middle brake, and right acceleration of modern stick-shift cars and trucks, operate completely differently. In case you're interested, the left pedal, fully depressed, operates first gear. You raise it up completely for second gear. The middle pedal operates a reverse function, and the right pedal operates as a brake, but not a friction brake. This is a transmission or engine brake. Put someone who has never driven a Model T before behind the wheel of one, and they're going to struggle to get it to do anything they want. The same is true for any number of different car technologies we've seen in the last 50 years that not every automaker adopted, from weird pattern shifting through to different wiper and indicator stalk controls. Like the fact that even today, many Japanese market cars reverse the indicator and wiper functionality that most other cars everywhere else in the world have. When you get behind the wheel of a car that doesn't have standard controls, or at least controls that you're reasonably used to, you're gonna feel uneasy and uncomfortable for some time. If you don't have those controls memorized in some form or another before you drive off, it's also going to make you more stressed and more distracted as a driver. Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are, to the people who use them, standard and familiar. You can set up your Apple CarPlay or Android Auto to behave the same regardless of what car you happen to be in. This gives you an homogenized experience for your in-car entertainment, your mapping, and anything else you might want to use in that car, regardless of whether it's your vehicle or a rental you've just picked up at the airport. The voice assistant, which you probably use outside the car, should also act as you expect it to, as it's probably been trained to some degree or other on your voice. This is in contrast to the metaphorical car crash of in-car voice assistants, which come with most cars. Assistants that may work, but may also think that you're asking for directions somewhere when you're just trying to adjust the AC. That's what normally happens with me. Standardization is one thing, but safety is something even more important. Android Auto and Apple CarPlay have become the standard, the thing that most people know how to use and how to implement. And in an ideal world where everyone followed the rules, GM shifting to its own in-house solution would just mean that owners of GM vehicles learned the new system and dealt with it. But let's face it, we are all creatures of habit, and we all know that won't happen in the real world. Instead, people just pick up their phones and try to do whatever it is they need to do that they would normally use on the in-car screen on their phone instead. Even those who decide to give a new in-car system a go will need said system to be so intuitive and easy to use that they can't easily be distracted while using it. And either way, if a driver is distracted by trying to learn a new in-car infotainment system, or distracted because they're trying to hold their smartphone and use it while they're driving because they can no longer use CarPlay or Android Auto, they're both dangerous drivers, regardless of how many in-car safety features their vehicle has. Next, let's deal with the elephant in the room. Automakers are not software companies. They might aspire to a future where that is the case, but all you have to do is to look at the in-car systems we've seen debuted in the last decade to know that very few systems are as intuitive and as easy to use as a smartphone. Furthermore, very few automakers, there are a few exceptions who do actually understand over-the-air software updates, don't really understand how to deploy updates without a plethora of issues, and struggle to respond quickly to security flaws and bugs in their vehicles. Why should they open up an in-car system to these kind of challenges when a simple connection to a smartphone can achieve the same for less effort? And then there's the development costs. When an automaker is looking to bring an electric car to market, they're looking to keep their own research and development costs down. Sure, there are probably some licensing fees associated with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, maybe to do with compatibility testing and other stuff like that. But that's got to be less than developing a brand new system completely from scratch. So why is GM doing this? Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, to be fair, are by no means perfect, but they are far better than anything else we have right now, and while they are not an ISO or SAE standard, because to my knowledge there isn't one yet covering that kind of system, they are the closest thing we have to an industry agreed upon standard. I should also point out here that Tesla and Rivian are under almost constant pressure from their existing and prospective customers to implement this in their vehicles as well. So why then is GM dumping something that works really well with most phones on the market in order to develop something that will take longer to develop and longer for customers to learn? With my cynical hat on, I think GM's move is more to do with being able to sell customers subscription services than anything else. It is effectively about additional revenue streams. Why give customers wired or wireless access to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto so that they can run pre-existing apps they're familiar with on their smartphones that don't require a subscription fee, when you could put those apps on your car, lock it down behind a paywall, and make them pay $10 or $15 a month to stay safe on the road? Using a mobile device that's not part of the car's built-in system or is not directly connected to the infotainment system is already illegal in most heavily populated US states, and while some states are dragging their feet, having your phone sit beside you to give directions or maybe stuck on a temporary mount next to the steering wheel is not a good policy for dealing with distracted driving. I do hope, though, that I'm wrong. I hope that GM's system is completely voice-activated, free with a car, and doesn't require an ongoing subscription service. But honestly, given the way that many automakers are heading right now and the prevalence of subscription services, you and I know exactly where GM's moving. I hope I'm proven wrong. Your move, GM. And on that note, we are done with today's video. If you have comments, drop us a polite note in the Discord chat room on Mastodon, or if you are a Patreon supporter, in the comments there. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links to regularly support us with a YouTube membership or a Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and Swag store, as well as that aforementioned Mastodon server. Scrolling on my right is the list of amazing Charged Up supporters, and shout-outs go out to our self-driving tier supporters: Paul Nelson, Mike Weeder, Danny Hyde, Linda Irish, Lance Schall, Mark Egerton, Cyprian Laplace, John Trammell, Alan Tupper, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Sean Tucker, Pedro Mora Pinheiro, Kyle Hodgson, Tony Moss, Brophy Wolf, Kyle Fox, Hey Esker, Tasla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C., Stefan Fremgen, Stephen Williams, Regine Fellows, Chris Sental, and Jim Burness. And finally, out of this world thanks to our top tier supporters: John L. Henderson, Clay Witt, CPU Freak 101, John Lyons, Kevin Burrowbridge, Andrew Glenn, Joe Hughes, Dave Kitchen, Joe Bresney, Nigel S., Matthew Drobnek, Eric Knack, Paul Conway, Stephen O'Donoghue, JP Fagerback, Reggie Watts, Marcel Ward, Robert Flannery, Aaron Hahn, Rory Litwin, Ellery Hensley, Will Graylin, and of course, Ian. Don't forget that we make videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday on this channel, plus over on Sundays on Take Two, our chicken and garden updates, and of course, our Sunday musing. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I will be back soon, as will the rest of the team. But as always, keep evolving. Keep evolving. Welcome to another classic Mac Easter egg. I have the G4 gigabit Ethernet tower behind me that I've opened up. It was the one that we were using to display the image in today's video. Unfortunately, you couldn't see this because it was behind the monitor, which I should have thought about. I need a bigger table, but this is what it looks like inside. And this is how easy it used to be to get into these Power Macs and these towers back in the day. You literally just pulled a single pull lever and the whole front end of the machine hinges down, and it gives you access to the PCI slots, to the RAM, allows you to put another hard drive in. This particular model has a zip drive. Unfortunately, I do not have any zip drives to put in it, but it has a zip drive. It has a DVD RW, so it's obviously been upgraded at some point in the past. And as I mentioned in last week's video, I've also put an SSD in it, the 128 gigabyte SSD that is in a 2.5-inch IDE adapter. So it means that those spinning drives, they're all starting to die, and rather than replace them with other expensive hard drives, it's just easier to put an SSD in, and it gives the machine a bit of a boost as well. I have some plans for this. I'm hoping to put some more RAM in it at some point. I would love to find a new graphics card, and additionally I do want to shout out to some of you who'd reached out and said, hey, I have an old classic Mac, would you like it for the show? I would love to hear from you. I have unfortunately deleted a couple of emails that we got when we were away a couple of weeks ago, so if you haven't heard from me, just ping me again. I'm sorry, we get so many emails, and last week we were driving and filming and driving and filming. It's 2 weeks ago when you're watching this, because I'm filming this before I head off to the UK. Anyway, you get the idea. Please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Reach out. I'd love to hear from you.